Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna. What is this thing? It's a pole saw. 115iPT4 or something like that. They're all pretty much the same. Customer complaint is that it didn't work. So I looked into this about a week prior to this video and confirmed that the motor was bad. And it needed a $150 motor to fix it, plus labor. I called the customer and he decided that was too much money, wasn't worth fixing it. Then he called me back a little while later and said, well, it's still cheaper than buying a new one, so go ahead and fix it. So here we are. Snap ring pliers, remove the drive gear. This metal chain guide plate has to come off. And the only reason for that is because it's hiding one of the screws that you need to loosen up to split the halves of this. So we take these small screws out. And you look down here, and that plate is hiding one of the screws. Now we can gain access to all the screws and pull them out. Don't waste any time. Hurry up. Alright, the two screws that are left, these are all the same. They're bigger screws when they hold the orange plastic housing to the aluminum pole. When you split this, the only thing that's going to be holding you up is the oil feed hose. And there it is. So you got a pole, a motor, a gear, and an oil tank. Pretty basic. There's no brush right there, though. That's our problem. The brush let loose, went through the motor, took out all the cooling fins on the fan, and it's junk. So there's a good brush on that side, and there's no brush on that side. Brush is in there somewhere, but it's all wedged up in the motor. So here's our part number for a new one. And this is a pretty simple job. You got to solder two wires together, put it back together. So I decided to leave a little extra wire here just to make the soldering job easier. You can see where the factory connection is, just below my finger there where I'm holding the wire. Look at that, there's a piece of plastic cooling fan, like that right there. Alright, now would be a good time to spread a little bit of that grease back over the gear. Redistribute some of it. I mean, I don't think we need to add any grease. That's the factory amount of grease they put on there. It doesn't look like any escaped anywhere. The thing's got very little run time. Smear some grease back in over the top of the gear. We're stripping the wires on our motor, twisting them a little bit. And then we'll strip the wires that come up the pole. First I want to wipe some of this oily residue off of them just to ensure I'm not going to get any of that grease into my solder connection. This stripper works pretty good for wires down to about 18 gauge. It's all a matter of preference. Another guy in the shop borrowed one of my other strippers that I don't care for at all, and he wants to buy one like it now. So everyone's got a different idea about what works best. Here I'm just putting some shrink tubing over the wires before I solder them together. And you want to get this shrink tubing far enough away from the heat of soldering that it doesn't melt in place right where it is now. Now there's 101 different ways to twist these wires together. I'm not telling you how to do this job. I'm just showing you what I did. Alright, two wires twisted together. Red to red, black to black. We're going to use a Matco battery-powered soldering iron. Now they say that it takes about 8 seconds to start melting solder. And that's accurate. It does not take long at all for the end of this to get hot. See, we're smoking already. Now, having said that, this may not get just quite hot enough. It's taken quite a while actually for me to solder these two wires together. I know I'm not using any flux, but I don't have any flux. But I wanted the solder to melt through the wiring and flow through the wires, so I know I had a good connection. I mean, I could have just dripped solder on the outside of the wires, I suppose, but that's not the right way to do it. I mean, it's handy, and it works well, you know, in a pinch. And I've soldered some smaller wires together. I snuck over to the other side of the shop while one of the 4-stroke guys was in the bathroom and soldered a couple of kill wires together on a project he was working on. And I was in and out of there in like 15 seconds. So, I mean, the thing works pretty good. But maybe the state of charge, I don't know. Right now I'm just cooling down the wiring before I try and push my shrinking ink over the top of the solder. So I've already had it where the shrink tubing starts to melt before you get it pushed all the way in place. I mean, you can see how hard I have to push this on there just to get it over to solder. If that solder was hot, I don't think I would have been able to do that without cooling it off. So now this side we're going to use an open flame to solder. Let's see how long this takes. Oh, I kind of gave it away there, 30 seconds. I'm not getting it so hot as to melt the insulation, maybe just a little bit right at the end. But I am getting it hot enough that solder is going to flow right through the joint. I kind of backed out before it happened, but it did flow through there. So take it for whatever. I mean, that's battery-powered soldering gun versus an open flame. We'll cool this off and we'll get our shrinky dink over the top of the joint. And then we'll take that open flame again, or we could use a heat gun, and we will melt or shrink the tubing. Now the thing I like about this clear tubing, and if you're looking at the wire, you can barely see it through the tubing because there's like air bubble between the plastic tubing and the insulation. But notice how it gets darker and darker, and you can see the wire better as the tubing shrinks. As the tubing shrinks to the insulation and there's no air in between, it leaves kind of a telltale sign that it's shrunk the way it should be. Now we got our motor pressed down into place, and again this would be a good time to spread some grease over the top of them gears. And the reason I'm saying it twice is because I wish someone would have been standing over my shoulder telling me to do it. Because I ended up opening this back up and spreading the grease because it just bothered me that I had forgotten to do it. It wasn't that big a deal. It added 5 minutes to the job because I caught it early enough, but whatever. So now to put this back together, we're going to have to get our oil feed hose pushed on to the discharge opening. And the hose is short, so it's kind of a hard job. You got to get things lined up. There's a little clip on the hose. You got to make sure that's in place. Kind of like a little band hose clamp. There we go. Now everything's just going to go back together the way it came apart. We'll get some the big screws started. And then we're just going to run all the smaller screws in. And we'll finish up with those smaller screws, tighten them by hand. Now our chain guide plate can go back on, and there's 3 small screws on this one. And this stuff's all just going into plastic, so don't get carried away. There's really not much to these saws. But you know, for a homeowner that's just reacting to some semi-annual pruning or something, it's fine. Here's our drive gear. We got to get our snap ring on it. There we go. All right, let's bar it up. We have the dial type tensioner, which seems a little bit cheesy on the surface, but I tell you what, you got this thing laying on the table like this. Once you get the chain in place and turn that dial, it's just going to sit there waiting for you to put the cover on. I mean, I don't know if it's nice system or whatever, but it's kind of handy right there. So now we'll put this is a detachable saw, so we will put this piece back on the power head end, or I should say the battery end or control end, I don't know, operator end, and we'll give it a try. So that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 115iPT4 battery powered pole saw motor replacement. Thanks for watching. Later.